Farmhouse by Sophie Blackall. Over the hill, at the end of a road, by a glittering stream that twists and turns, stands a house. Where 12 children were born and raised, where they learned to crawl in the short front hall, where they posed, arranged on the wooden stairs, and were measured with marks over the years. Where they carved potatoes and dipped them in paint to pattern the walls with flowers and leaves, and painted the cat about which they lied. For which they were scolded, and maybe they cried, and then were enfolded in forgiving arms in the serious room where the organ was played and the speeches made. But if they weren't even sorry at all, they were sent to their rooms. Where they pored over books about planets and stars, then climbed into beds where they dreamed of Mars, or they dreamed of cats or the distant sea. And whispered secrets, played truth or dare, and lost their teeth and brushed their hair, where they kept collections of tin toy cars and feathers and bones and movie stars, where they hung prize ribbons for champion cows that lived in the barn behind the house. Were milked twice a day, no matter what the weather, at dawn and at dusk by one child or another, who shivered and grumbled as they crossed the yard, or liked being alone with a flaming cloud, depending on the season, the day, and the child. And they fed the calves and mucked out the stalls and forked the hay into giant piles and fished for trout in the glittering stream that changed its shape from year to year. And walking home with their rods and flies, they picked gnarled apples to turn into pies. And dragged in mud from fields outside, so they shook the rug and scrubbed the floors and listened to their mother and did their chores and set the table. And bowed their heads and dished up soup and tore up bread. And took turns tending the youngest one, who lay with a fever and a spotted tongue. And as they watched and darned their socks and sewed on buttons that once were shells in the faraway sea that they'd never seen, and they waited for spring, which eventually came, as it did every year, with blossoms and rain, which leaked through the holes that had grown in the roof and collected in bowls and in pans and in pails, staining the wall in the short front hall with the flowers and the leaves and the measures and the marks. From all the children who all grew up in this house and who went off to school or to work on a farm or to drive a truck or to train as a nurse or to study the stars or have babies themselves, until one day, the youngest child, who was now quite old, took a last look around and picked up her case and opened the door. And stepped outside and into a car where her sister was waiting to drive to the sea which they'd always, always wanted to see. And the house gave a sigh and slumped on the stones, which caused a slight lean in its beams and its bones. So the door swung open to let in the breeze. And welcomed the rain that rotted the floor, where a sapling grew right next to the stove, where the wallpaper peeled like onion skins and drifted about with the fallen leaves, and the button that was once a shell in the sea. By the parlor organ that rattled with nuts, put there by a squirrel with rather a fuss, which startled the swallows that fed on the moths that fluttered and flew all over the house. There was even a bear in the basement one year who slept there all winter until the spring. Which was when I came and cut a path through the prickly burdock and the nettles and grass and found what remained of the old farmhouse, where I filled my arms with wallpaper scraps and rain-soaked books and brittle maps and mud-caked dresses and handkerchiefs and a button that was once a shell in the sea. And back at my desk, I spread them all out and cherished my gifts from the falling down house. Then I sharpened my pencil and mixed some paint and dipped my brush and cut some shapes and began to imagine the things that took place. In a home where 12 children were born and raised, where they ate and slept and worked and played and laughed and loved and grew quite old, where they'd live on now in this book that you hold, like your stories will, so long as they're told.